Hello, welcome to Evidence-Based Practice Assessment 3 video. I'm Jim Radford and my student number is 7936072. Clinical question. So from the 6 options that we were presented, I chose statement 3. Working in construction is associated with respiratory illness. Using the PICO format, I derived P as construction workers, I as respiratory illness, C as people who do not work in construction, and O increased susceptibility to respiratory illness. And from that, I made the question, are construction workers more susceptible to respiratory illnesses than those in other professions? Key and alternate words. Using the PICO framework and the question from last slide, I picked some key words. I picked the keywords as construction workers, respiratory illness, non-construction workers, and susceptible. And I picked some alternate words to go with them. So for construction workers, I also had builders, carpenters, stonemasons, contractors, craftsmen, handymen, bricklayers, and occupational. For respiratory illness, I had disease, disorder, infection, sickness, conditions. For non-construction workers, I had desk jobs, desk workers, office workers, non-operators, non-technical workers. For susceptible, I had increased likelihood, receptive, risk, possibility, and odds. Refining the search. So using a combination of the key and alternate words from the previous slide, I came up with the Boolean search term on screen, construction workers and respiratory conditions, and increased risk, with quotation marks in the appropriate areas. And I used CINEL as one of my databases to search. I used my Boolean search phrase and used the limiters of publications between 2023 and 2025, source types of academic journals, age, all adults, and publication of healthcare, resulting in 13 articles. Using the same Boolean search, I used Google Scholar as my second database to search. I tried to use similar limiters, so 2023 to 2025, sort by relevance, and type was reviewed articles, coming to a total of 21 articles, seemingly more applicable just on a first glance than CINEL was. Selecting articles. After combing through the articles on each database, I selected 2 from each database that were most applicable to the question that I had formed. The 2 articles I selected from Google Scholar seemed very promising in answering my question, whereas the articles from CINEL were less promising. And that could be due to a large sum of reasons, from my search phrase to the database itself, but I'll touch more on that when I get to the reflection. Articles reviewed. So I decided to select and review the 2 articles from Google Scholar, as they both had applicability to answering my question and were much more specific. There was a literature review from ResearchGate, occupational lung disease among workers in the construction industry in the MENA region, and there was a literature review from BMJ Open Respiratory Research with the title Work-Related Respiratory Health Conditions Among Construction Workers, a Systematic Narrative Review. The highest source of evidence. As a brief overview from the article from ResearchGate, the focus was on occupational lung disease, specifically in construction workers within the Middle East and North Africa region. It identifies the risks and exposures, highlights a lack of protective measures and knowledge gaps among the workers, and suggests stricter laws, law enforcement, new policies, and better training to mitigate the risk. Whereas the BMJ Open Respiratory Research article, the focus was on systematically reviewing respiratory illness among construction workers. It identified 16 respiratory conditions and major exposure risks. It highlights the risk factors like smoking and prolonged exposures. And it discussed mitigative strategies beyond PPE, such as ventilation, engineering controls, and administrative measures. So to put these two articles side by side, the ResearchGate article scope focused exclusively on construction workers in the MENA region, which is not ideal. And it did not compare to any other industries. And the conclusion was that the risk to construction workers is greater, but just didn't compare to any other jobs. So there wasn't a control measure. Whereas the BMJ Open Respiratory article, it reviewed respiratory conditions among construction workers globally and discussed the relevant risks to the relevant occupations. And it explicitly states that construction workers are at higher risk compared to other industries. So as a final verdict, the BMJ article is more applicable to answering whether construction workers are more susceptible to respiratory illnesses than other professions. It provides comparative data to explicitly discuss the risks faced by construction workers in relation to their occupational group. So, in conclusion, the BMJ article is a higher form of research, and to answer my question, yes. Excuse me. Yes, construction workers are more susceptible to respiratory illnesses than other occupations. Reflection. So I decided to use the Gibbs reflective cycle to help me reflect on how I went in this assessment. So I was able to attain 2 applicable articles to compare and analyze that were relevant to the question I had formed through the PICO framework. I felt as though I was able to achieve the desired outcome, although I felt as though there were some aspects I could have improved on. I felt as though during the research in alternative databases, I could have utilized a better database than CINAHL, as it seemed to be too orientated toward the healthcare setting, and with my specific search, it didn't yield good results or applicable results. And with CINAHL, I might have had better results if I had used more alternative words and made my search more specific than respiratory conditions, as this phrase mainly produced COVID-19 articles in relation to construction workers, which were not applicable to the research I was conducting. I've learnt to utilize databases that are more applicable to the research topic at hand. I've also learnt to use more alternate words in my search to make my results more specific and more applicable. When researching in the future, I will now know how to better tailor my search across multiple databases and pay more attention to the databases I select in the first place, better improving my quality of search, the applicability of my results, and the number of relevant articles. These are the references for the databases, references, and images I have used during the slideshow. Thanks for listening, and yeah, have a great day.